welcome, and I do hope you enjoy this video workshop. We will get started. What is podcasting and what will it do for someone with a blog? I honestly think that a lot of people don't even know what podcasts are. They don't know how it works. They don't know how to record one. They don't know how to do anything to do with it. But doesn't it sound exciting that you can have like your own little mini radio show? And that's kind of what happens. And you totally run the whole show. The only cost is the hosting cost of your media files, which is going to be either audio or video, whatever you do. At the end of the day, that's not a terribly big cost. It can get big, though, if you have a really big and successful show. But we'll talk about that a bit later. I guess what I'm saying is it's really not that expensive, and yet most people just don't try it because they don't know about it. But the potential of it's huge. So basically, this module, the first module, is where we talk about what podcasting is and what it will do for someone with a blog. And the second module is where we get inspiration from bloggers who already have a podcast. And I've got over 15 bloggers there who've got some pretty fantastic podcast shows going on, and more in the pipe works. It's something that once you get into it, if you can make it work for you, it tends to just escalate and run away with you. So many things you can do. You can have 10 shows if you want. You know, I mean, I don't know if I'd do that, but you can. So why did I create this video workshop? Well, first of all, I'm not a techie person. I didn't want any techie speak in my training, and a lot of the training around is quite techie. So you want to try and find something very basic, and I also wanted to find something that was suited to bloggers, people that already had a blog. Let me explain. A lot of people who go to learn podcasting actually don't have a blog. They just want to go and create a podcast. Like they kind of want to create their own radio show, and then they want to go get sponsors, or they do go get sponsors. So I guess what I'm trying to say is that for this particular training, I wanted to keep it really basic. If you want more advanced training, you can get it online. And I do have a free forum at katesforum.com where you can brainstorm and get help from me and other bloggers and podcasters. And especially even if you just want to tell me about your podcast you created, I can go give you a review on iTunes, because that's really important too. Do I have a podcast show? I actually have two, but I've only started them recently and I've been having a ball with them at the moment. Blogger Interviews podcast is pretty definitive what I do. I interview bloggers. Special Needs Trust Fund Estate Planning podcast, completely different. Okay, so I wrote a book on special needs trust fund estate planning, obviously, and I wanted to promote that book through a podcast. I wanted to reach as many people as possible, and so I didn't really have a blog. I did create a blog to go with the podcast, okay? Essentially, though, it's a tool for me to discuss what's in the book. I actually intend to give away the book, so it might sound a little odd, but there will be ways for me to monetize that, perhaps in the future, maybe sooner than later. But at the end of the day, that's something that I do more on a personal level because my daughter is autistic. But the Blogger Interviews podcast is definitely more mainstream and commercial, and that's where I interview bloggers about their life and their journey and what they're doing and tips and all that sort of thing. And it might even be one day you. I mean, I don't know. So that's really the one I focus from my normal blog, myonlinetip.com, and I actually also run it from my website, kateluella.com. Now, I do have another video workshop in addition to this one called Fast Track Podcast Creation. And that's targeting bloggers again who really just want to get straight into podcasting, don't want to get caught up with technical know-how and, you know, expensive equipment and all that. I really try to keep it very basic, where you just need a mic. If you don't have a mic, then you need to get a mic if you want a podcast. But you don't need headphones and mixers and things like that. It's just not necessary. The mic I actually use, and the mic I'm using right now for this recording, is my Logitech webcam mic. It's not even a mic. It's a webcam with a built-in HD mic. It's the HD 720p if anyone's interested. I think last time I looked it was about $30 or $40 on eBay and Amazon, all that sort of thing. But obviously, you know, you can spend a fortune if you want. You know, it's up to you. But look, my Fast Track Podcast Creation video workshop is where we actually record the shows, upload them, add the RSS code and all that sort of, I guess, the techie side of it, if you want to look at it that way. Whereas this particular workshop is more about podcasting and inspiration for podcasting. So what is a podcast? This is the first thing that I think needs defining. It's a regular subscription to your video or audio shows. You might say, well, I've got a blog and you can subscribe to my blog. Why can't I just put my audio into my blog? Well, you can, but people won't get notified into their inbox in iTunes of your new podcast. They will if they've subscribed to your blog, well, they just like any other post. They're notified there's a new post, that they're going to get notified of them all. When you're doing a podcast, typically, and you're putting it onto iTunes, it's people that are really just looking for podcasts. They're not looking for bloggers who podcast. They're just looking for podcasts. So you're opening up that new door to potential traffic. They call it traffic in internet marketing, but you might call it listeners. And if you can imagine, when you're thinking about podcasts, there's podcast and podcast show. So, for example, The Simpsons is the podcast and the weekly show is the episode. Okay, so when people say I've got a podcast, they've got a podcast, but you still have to put podcast shows in wherever you do it, weekly, monthly. It's completely up to you how you do your podcasts. Are they video or audio? They can be either one. And in fact, they can be both. They could be both in the one go. You could record your audio with an image to the background and therefore convert it to a video. And you can have a video that you also offer in just an MP3, which is audio format. It's up to you, and most people go with one or the other. And the reason for that is if you want subscribers, they need to know what's coming. Martha Stewart, for instance, she does both because she's got a big audience, and some things she needs to show you how to do, and other things she's just talking and I guess educating and so forth. And of course you could do that. There's certainly a lot of people that do have both, and when you go into iTunes, which I'm going to show you in a minute, you'll see there's a little TV screen there if it's a video, so people know straight away what they're getting when they sign up to your podcast, because they can see if it's audio or a video. Our podcast just audio of you reading out your blog posts. This was really funny because I thought, who would do that? But you know what? Actually, a lot of people do it, so I had to be really careful. You certainly can do that and just post it up to iTunes. And the theory is that the people who don't come to your blog will still be able to hear what you have to say because they subscribe through iTunes. Double the work for you. Don't know if it's double the benefit. I guess it is. It's more benefit anyway to people who don't come to your blog. It's completely up to you, though. Most bloggers make their podcasts unique in some way, and this comes down to podcasting strategy. So when you start out, and in my fast track podcast creation thing, we really look closely at podcasting strategy. What is it you're trying to achieve? How do you want to achieve it? We're going to talk a bit more about that too in a minute in this particular workshop, because I think it's important to understand it. Discuss blog post topics in more depth. Absolutely. So, I mean, you can't write a 3,000 word blog post. No one will read it. Not unless you're saying, how your mother died of something drastic, and then, they're going to sit there and read through all that. But generally speaking, that there's blogging experts out there who blog about blogging, and they will say, something like, what is it, 300 words, 200 words? It's quite succinct, quite simple. But when you talk, you can talk forever. And there's just so much you can do more so when you're talking. So discussing your blog post topics in more depth is definitely one of the ways to go. And different perspectives to what you've written about, things like that. You can also then, if you've got a little short written blog post, you can actually embed the player that has the long 1 hour talking about it that you've put on your podcast show right into that blog post. So that if that's not multitasking your media files, I don't know what is, but yeah, that's pretty awesome. Discussing comments in past blog posts. Look, these are a few ideas. There's definitely, I'm sure you'll know what I'm talking about when I say that, when someone's made a comment, you think, well, that's ridiculous, or maybe it's like, oh, what a great idea. I never thought of it that way. And then you go write a podcast about it. Thanks to Sue Ellen, who said blah, blah, blah. I'm now going to suggest we all have a think about this, because I've made a phone call to blah, 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 and they told me this. So let me share with you what that means. And you know what I mean? Whereas in a blog post where you type it all out, it's a little bit more constraining and short, straight to the point. What is a podcatcher? I thought I'd get this right out of the way because it's really important. You will see people around, I don't really know what a podcatcher is. Well, they kind of do know, but they don't realize it. It's iTunes. It's also Juice, Zune, Podcast Alley, and so on. Basically, podcatchers are people that catch your podcast show. So they list it, they show people how to subscribe to your podcast, but they don't host your podcast. You have to have your own podcast host. Okay, so we'll talk about that later. At the end of the day, they're imperative. That's where people find you. That's how they find your product. But to be honest, it's really just a directory. Okay, so in iTunes, it's called the iTunes Store, and we're going to go look at that in a minute. Juice is apparently that's been around since day one, so it's pretty profound. Zune That's Microsoft's version of iTunes. Podcast Alley is a very popular one with a voting system for popularity. Also, I believe there's actually over 70 or something potential. I did see a software program you could buy. I can't remember where. It was about $75, and it would list your podcast with all those podcatchers in one fell swoop. Here's the thing. First of all, you don't know if it's current, but that doesn't matter. It'd still catch the most ones. You only have to do it once. Okay, so once you've listed your podcast with iTunes, you never have to go back into iTunes ever again. You only upload your file. It is your RSS feed that tells iTunes, hey, guess what? There's a new file here for you to listen to. Let anyone know who's subscribed that we've got a new show ready to go. You just click on download and it's yours. Okay, so you can listen through iTunes, but iTunes don't actually host it. So they point it directly to your media file when someone chooses to play it.